So welcome back, everyone, from that mini break, and I hope that the breakout rooms, chat rooms, worked well. And we're sorry that I've heard that people are just sorry that chat rooms are so short, but we hope it gives you a taste of that genre. But now we hope some of you have got a cup of tea or a glass of wine or a sober glass of water. But we're really thrilled to have Professor Megan Davis talk to us. Professor Davis has a named chair at the University of New South Wales, the Balnaves Chair in Constitutional Law that was established just this year. She's the inaugural incumbent of that chair, and she's also at the University of New South Wales. She's also Pro-Vice-Chancellor Indigenous. So Megan has won a lot of fame as a constitutional lawyer. She's also Vice Chair of the UN Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And she's just been telling us that, in fact, this is one of her New York meeting weeks, and she's been meeting all through the nights, New York time. So we're extremely grateful that she's willing to talk to us at this such a pressured time. So Megan, welcome. It's fantastic to have you here. And
thank you.
I wanted you to reflect, and perhaps this is a good week given that you're so steeped in it. What would you say, how useful is the international arena for promoting progressive causes? Today we've been talking about women's rights, but perhaps you could talk about that, or more generally, what's your assessment of the international arena as a site for activism and change?
Well, I think it's been a really important and effective site for activism and change. And I think Indigenous people's issues is one of those areas that I think is a testament to that. I mean, a lot of conversations that have been had through the kind of UN mechanisms over the past 40 years, including climate change and the melting of the permafrost, happened decades before they were being discussed in a mainstream sense and having any traction at an international level. And I remember being a really young kid working with my first UN fellowship straight. I was at law school at the time, and being in some side conversations with different oil companies about particular terrible, gross violations of people's human rights, but also environmental damage. And, 20 years later, this particular Indigenous group is getting a substantial compensation payout. But certainly a lot of that activism and awareness raising at the UN level, and being able to have those quiet conversations with those corporations in those settings has kind of pioneered a lot of the work, I would argue, in business and human rights. And so for Indigenous peoples, the UN system, I think, has enabled them to navigate member states. So it's a UN, obviously, a member state system that is very conservative and has its own, as you know, Hilary, ritualism about the way it does and doesn't do things. And we've been able to navigate around that by using the United Nations, who has been able to, in certain areas, prosecute a progressive agenda that many countries don't support. And that, I think, that has been the value of the United Nations and that international arena. And I had a conversation this morning with Sean Brennan, one of my colleagues at UNSW Law, about Uluru, but he said to me, how are you feeling post-Trump? Because he knew how despondent I was about another 4 years of President Trump at the helm and its impact upon multilateralism. I mean, we were starting to see really serious impacts of, for example, the United States on the UN's work, and it is just been so invaluable, I think, to the advancement of Indigenous people's rights. So I think it's from my experience, it's there's a lot of strengths. I mean, the weaknesses are that it's a UN member states body, right? That's the weakness. But at the same time, we have seen some really substantial wins for Indigenous peoples. because of it.
Well, thank you. I'm going to hand over to Louise now, and I think we're moving from the value of the international arena, and she'll take you, I think, to Australia. So over to you, Louise.
Well, Megan, we can't have you in the room without asking you about Indigenous rights in Australia, and particularly about the Uluru Statement. It's something that we could have a whole session with you on, but I'm just wondering if you could reflect a little bit about women's roles in that that whole process, in terms of the incredible work you did, dialogues in the community, and then actually sort of crafting the statement, and then the politics since then, and all the work you've done to try and get traction on this issue. Just so important to see you there, and Pat Anderson, obviously, and others. Just wondering if you could reflect for us how important women's voices have been in that whole process.
Yeah, no, I was looking at some of the material from the Beijing conference, actually, and I was thinking about women and power and decision making, and that became really key. I mean, that the Beijing platform has helped frame a lot of Indigenous stuff in the international law, but it certainly did have an influence on the drafting of the declaration. And I was looking at some of the material around women and power and decision making, thinking about the important role that women did play in, for many years in the lead up to Uluru, really. The Referendum Council was the tail end of that process. But certainly Auntie Pat Anderson really is an absolute stellar. You know, she led this process, a very difficult process, for both her own people and in managing the state. And I, you know, Noel and I and those involved in that process always take our hat off to the important work that she played as a leader in an area where, you know, women's voices and opinions and legal opinions and legal assessments can be dismissed because you're a woman. So that's important. And then, of course, the work we did in designing and running the dialogues were absolutely in alignment with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And we'd made a kind of concerted effort to ensure there was an important gender balance when we asked for a kind of elevation of the voices of traditional owners and cultural authority in that process. And then what I found really interesting and really moving as a kind of constitutional lawyer who went into that process, you know, who's always thinking about power and structures, to hear these extraordinary women from across the country just speak in the language of peace and nation building and peace. And I was just so moved by the way that they viewed the world and how they wanted peace for their country because they wanted peace for their grannies and their children. And I feel like the Uluru Statement from the heart and what's at the core of it, which is about a peaceful coexistence and about using that structural reform to empower our people in a way that, you know, can't be changed from one government to the next. I feel like it's really imbued with that female spirit that I felt as we travelled around, and you would have a very young, angry generation, and then you'd have this incredible voice of generosity and peace, really generous about what we could offer to the Australian people to help them come on this journey. So they've really absolutely been at the core of it. And I think, you know, Auntie Pat and I have run Zooms for 3 years on Friday nights with, you know, mob and supporters. And I think about, like last week, she was really, really tired, like really exhausted. And I was just thinking about, you know, the huge effort that it takes just to keep kicking this ball along until we get the referendum, which we're kind of confident about, right? You don't do these things unless you think you can achieve it. But I do think women absolutely are a driving force behind this.
Just on that question of the referendum, Megan, I mean, we have already had some suggestions from Sue Harris-Rimmer and others of takeaways today of what we can do. And I'm just wondering, because it's such a generous offer in the Uluru Statement from the Heart for us to walk with you and be led by Indigenous people, but is there any messages that you want to convey this afternoon about how we might do that in a practical sense through our work and our different communities that we're engaged in?
Well, I suppose one thing I'd say is that something we'll be doing next year, only Pat and I and a number of women, including Jackie Huggins, and we're going to run these, what we call cuppa Zooms, but these conversations between Australian women all over the country. And so having women participate in that is going to make a big difference, because we feel like, women lead and shape the conversations in their homes, and they're the decision makers on so many things in homes. And that is the way our women and people wanted this kind of activism to roll out as we try and galvanise more Australian support, is through Australian women. And that means talking to CWA, it means talking to Liberal women, it means talking to corporate women. And so maybe just watch out for that. I mean, we have a website, ulurustatement.org, and people can register, and we want people to come on those conversations with us, which will be about having frank conversations. We intend to have frank conversations about the role of white Australian women on the frontier and in the rollout of, particular government agendas, particularly during the protection era and the kind of contemporary neo-paternalism that exists, but also the ways in which women can bring peace to this country and the way we can work together to kind of get this done and just develop an understanding about who we are. So I just wanted to foreshadow that, just because I think it's that's what is on our mind about how we're going to get this done. But yeah, I mean, Sue's right. Any statement of support that individually, organisationally, anything that people can give to support, we bundle them up each week and send them off to the Prime Minister. We had the Council of Australian Imams this week and Greenpeace this week, and it's quite extraordinary to see this momentum growing of people saying, we would like to come on board for the journey and walk with you. So those kinds of endorsements are really super critical in terms of moving this forward, and we feel like we're in a really good place. And so, yeah, I think that's important. And I think about just, I do think the role of women in getting this forward is important, because I think some people say, and I think they're probably right to some degree, there was a bit of gender wrapped up in that kind of immediate rejection of this reform. It's not the conventional way that Aboriginal kind of declarations or statements have been made. It has been led by women. Women have been the front face of it, and that makes old power uncomfortable.
There's a bit of gender wrapped up in the response to it's sort of predictable masculinity in a way.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well,
so I'm just
Thank you. I'm conscious of our time, and I'm really.
Yeah, no, I was looking at that clock. But wait, there's more. But yeah,
there's lots more. But we will tweet the website address, and I think that sounds like a fantastic opportunity for everyone to be able to get involved in those conversations, and, as you say, push that agenda forward and make change. As Eleanor Roosevelt says, if human rights aren't happening in our very own homes, they're not happening anywhere. So it's about having those conversations, I think. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for all the incredible work you're always doing, Megan. You're just phenomenal. I don't know how you do it.
No, I do it. I mean the sleep part. Thank you for fitting me in, though. Yeah.
No, of course. It's just been our privilege to have you join us. So thank you very much. And Hilary will probably want to have the last word.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you so much, Megan, for being with us and for sharing these ideas. And I love the idea of a cuppa Zoom, and I'll be signing up. I think that's
we'll be hitting you up to lead one.
A brilliant idea. Well, that's a beautiful segue, I think, from Megan reminded us of so many different things, but the idea about gendered reactions in politics, I think, is a very powerful one. I hadn't thought of it quite in those terms, but I think you put your finger on something very powerful. A knee-jerk, we won't have that. That's not the Australian way. I think what you're saying is we should be immediately sort of suspicious of language like that. So that's a very important thing. And looking, I think, as I've discussed with you before meeting, that the language of the Uluru Statement, the very beautiful language, is also a beautiful link to the final event that we've got, which is Maxine Beneva-Clark and her beautiful poem. So I think they're both poetry speaking to one another. But just before we get to Maxine, let me just say a few round-up final words. First of all, it's been so fantastic to have this event today, but it's also been really tantalising because I think, and they're on the screen at the moment, some of my very favourite, most wonderful people have all been present, but none have been right here in the same room. And I've both loved seeing everybody from different places, but also really missed the contact with old friends and making new friends. So, but still, it's fantastic it was possible to pull this together. It did seem for a while as though we'd have to call it all off. And it's really due to the team at UNSW led by Alison Nolan, who's been Alison for president, is what I say. And everything I know in my life. So warmest thanks, Alison, to you and your team. And of course, to the wonderful Louise, who has been such a fantastic travelling companion and moving everything along so graciously with so much enthusiasm. I just had two quick thoughts on the unbelievably rich agenda. And one, it was something that came out a few times. I think it's particularly in what Rosemary Kia said, but it came out before that too, is that in times of crisis, in what we're now finding ourselves, the crisis of COVID, how one of the issues in a crisis is how this immediately narrows the possibilities for women's rights. And we really have to be, I think, in times of crisis, Carmen Lawrence made this point very powerfully too, that this is a moment to really to have to double down and to fight even more, because crisis seems to almost be an alibi for let's go back to the old system. Those are the ways that are tried and true. So that's just one reflection I had. And the other one is the distinction between hope and optimism. These words came up a little bit today, people being optimistic or... and I was very struck by a wonderful article I read recently by Karen Nicholson, an academic, a Canadian academic, on the differences between hope and optimism. And she said something I think that's really useful perhaps as a finishing thought, how there is a distinction between hope and optimism and faith. And she actually draws on the work of Terry Eagleton in saying this. But she said, well, optimism could be seen as a quirk of personality. That person is just optimistic. So whatever, they'll always, the glass half full type of person. But she said we have to be careful about optimism, because that can also just reinforce conservatism, because it's like faith in a benign future, that this will just happen. Whereas hope requires work. The idea is with hope, things could work out, but they will require work to do so. So we need, in fact, to engage in what she calls constructive hope. So as opposed to hope that's based on denial. So I think it's really important, and she makes this point in that we have to draw on connection and community to sustain that sort of constructive hope. And I'm hoping constructively that today has created both connections and community for engaging in what is a constant struggle, but a worthwhile and a hopeful struggle for the improvements in women's lives all over the world. With that, over to you, Louise.